Hello everybody! I wanted to take the time today to do a video about my trusty Nikon D5000. This is the camera that I have used for over a decade and nothing could ever make me replace it. Ooh, shiny! Thanks for checking out Green Phantom Digital Media. Just a reminder, content on this channel is not intended for young audiences. If you like what you see, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. So, if it wasn't obvious from the intro, somebody got a new camera. And no, it's not naturally yellow. That's a case that I put on it. I have, in fact, been shooting for almost a decade on Nikon, originally starting with the Nikon D60, and I eventually moved to the Nikon D5000. So about 8-9 of the 10 years I've been shooting was on that D5000. And it really was a wonderful camera, and it was very durable, but I decided it was time to upgrade. And I wanted to go with a mirrorless option, and right now, Sony has the best mirrorless option. So what I got was a Sony A7R2. Couple years old. I went with the R2 over the R3 or the R4, save a little bit of money, and honestly, while a nice little megapixel jump was fun, the D5000 was a 12 megapixel camera and the A7R2 is a 42 megapixel camera. I didn't really see the need to jump all the way to the 4 for 60 something megapixels, and the few features that were added to the 3 were things I won't really particularly use. So I saved myself a couple grand and went with the A7R2. That said, I wanted to share with you some of the usage that I got of this camera, because I've actually had it for a few weeks now. I got it end of February, so I've had it for about 3-4 weeks, and I've had some time to do some location shooting and some studio shooting, and the easiest way that I can find to talk to you about what the difference in the two cameras is to very simply and very succinctly compare images that are similar to each other. I did not shoot any direct correlation images because I ended up passing my D5000 onto my assistant and didn't have it handy when I was shooting, but I can compare similar images. I'm going to compare some location images for you and some studio images for you so you can get an idea of just what the differences in the cameras are. So we'll start with these two pictures of Kayla, who you've probably seen pop up on my channel in a few videos. These two pictures obviously are the same model. They're shot at the same location. I think it might actually literally be the exact same spot at the same location. Both shot at Amazing Las Vegas Comic Con, just in different years. Lighting situation is the same, using a reflector in broad daylight. The picture on the left is shot with my Nikon D5000, and the picture on the right is shot with my new Sony A7R2. And that'll be the case for all of these comparisons. The picture on the left will always be the Nikon, the picture on the right will always be the Sony. The first thing that stands out to me about these two photos is how much truer the colors are from the Sony camera. And that goes to how they handle dynamic range. While we were shooting during daytime hours for both of these photo shoots, in both cases we were also dealing with periodically overcast sky and working with the reflector as our primary source of light, which made it more than a little difficult to bounce light around easily. So we got a bit of underexposure in both cases, some shadows that we would have preferred not to deal with, and the fact of the matter is the high dynamic range of the Sony A7R2 just made that a lot easier for me to correct in post. A lot of the weird color cast on the photo from my Nikon is down to the fact that I had to fudge how I dealt with shadows in order to salvage the photo, because the sensor on the Nikon, it's a 10-year-old camera. It just didn't deal with lighting the same way. In addition, because it's a lower megapixel count, if you really look at the photo on the left, you can see a bit of noise in the background where I brought up the shadows. I had to bring up the shadows in the photo on the right as well, but because of the much larger sensor and the higher dynamic range in the A7R2, I was able to do so without nearly as much noise and recovering a lot more detail in those shadowed areas, making for a much more balanced final image. Our next model is Min, who you've also seen on my channel before, but in fairness you would be forgiven for not realizing it. The couple times that he's popped up on my channel, he's been dressed as Deadpool, full mask and full gear and all. These two pictures were taken at the same two cons as the last two pictures. As a matter of fact, the picture on the left was shot at the exact same time as the picture on the left from the previous set of images. Now, of course, we have the same lighting situations, the same camera comparison, yada yada, all the same stuff, but there's one thing that really sticks out at me about the Nikon image in this particular set. Min, of course, is wearing a bald cap for his cosplay, and I think I did a pretty good job patching it in post, but one of the places that I used to run into problems with my Nikon is that because it was such a small sensor compared to what's out in the world these days, whenever I would try to do complex patch jobs like that, I would really have to fight with the image to get the pixels that I needed in order to convincingly fill in various and sundry areas. And of course, there's not a lot of heavy photoshopping in the image from the Sony in this pair because it's a very straightforward image, but I have done a lot of heavy editing on images since getting the Sony, and because I have more pixels to work with from that larger sensor, I have a much easier time doing patch jobs like that. Much like the previous two images, I had to pull up the exposure and recover the shadows on both of these. And you can see with the image on the right, the color stayed true, and I got back a lot of detail in the shadows with no noise. If you look closely at the image on the left, you'll notice that not only are the colors in general distorted, but if you look at his beard, it looks almost as if I photoshopped it on after the fact due to the color distortion. I did not. He was actually wearing that beard in real life. It is a fake beard, but it was there in the actual photo, and the color distortion produced by the smaller sensor in the Nikon makes it look like it's photoshopped in. For our last pair of comparison photos, we have Kathy, who's popped up on our last couple holiday-themed videos on this channel. Now, these are studio photos as opposed to location photos, and Kathy's the only studio shoot that I've gotten to do so far with my new camera. There's two things that really jump out at me about these photos. One of them is in post with the editing. I've talked a couple times about how the Sony has a bigger sensor and makes editing easier because it gives me more pixel information to work with. One of the things that I noticed in post was that images taken with the new camera make it a lot easier for me to get accurate selections, especially when I'm color changing backdrops, which is something that I do a lot in my editing. It's a big part of my style. The other thing that I really want to point out with these two images is just how much truer the skin tones are coming out of the Sony. The skin tones coming from the Nikon are very, very washed out in comparison, and that's even before I get to editing. Now granted, I do have a tendency to desaturate skin tones in my editing, but one of the things that I've realized working with the Sony is that tendency kind of developed from the fact that I was never totally happy with the skin tones that the Nikon produced. The Sony just produces much more pleasant skin tones. And of course, if you look closely at the image on the left, you'll notice that it has a lot more noise than the image on the right. That again goes back to that larger sensor in the Sony. It's better at handling low light situations than the Nikon is. And believe it or not, in the eyes of my Nikon, even studio lighting was a quote-unquote low light situation, which means I would frequently get a lot of noise shooting in the studio. Not something I have to worry about anymore with the Sony. I get very clean, very sharp images from it. And that gives you an idea of the differences between my old camera and my new camera, and hopefully some of what you can expect from me in the future. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to click like and subscribe if you like the content, and I'll be back in the future with some new photo related content.